plan your project properly, get the site ready for an autumn planting, and if you get a good autumn, in other words, you get a early break in the weather and you get really good moisture in the ground and the site is ready for planting and the soil is still warm, so the atmosphere starts cooling down first and the soil cools down slower. If there's still good soil temperature, which will probably be in, say, in April, if at the beginning of April you've got good soil moisture and your site is ready, you've done all the weed control and all the cultivation, it's all done, and your seedlings are ready to be planted, which they would be if you've ordered them early enough, then do an autumn planting. The plants won't grow much, but the tops of the plants won't grow much, but the roots will grow really well and they set up a really good root system and they'll fly the next spring. If that lucky autumn break doesn't happen, which will be most of the time, it seems, unless down here things are different, but up our way we don't seem to get good autumn breaks very often, then the site is ready for spring planting anyway, and all you're doing is buying more time to get another flush of germination on your well-prepared ground, which you can then again either hit with a herbicide, or you can smother it once more or till it once more to knock any weeds off that are coming up before you're planting, so that when the plants go in the ground they've got a head start from anything else that's trying to compete with them.
I was told, as like a general rule of thumb, if you plant in spring, that generally can mean that you then have to nurse them through summer.
Okay.
Whereas if you plant them in autumn, they've got the winter, then they can handle the summer potentially a bit better.
Really good point. Good question. I think, especially on coastal customers I have from coastal areas, are always encouraged to try and get them done in autumn. Even if, especially for smaller plantings, we say, let's try and get a tanker out there and water them in if we don't get enough soil moisture. If it's not too big a planting, is actually do some, because the evaporation in autumn, say in end of April, let's say, is very, very low. So if you put some water in your planting holes, or water the seedlings in really well, you've got a good chance of having a few weeks before they need another one, and by then you will get some autumn rain, so you're starting to look pretty safe. And when I say spring planting, I mean end of August is cut off. So the plants have to be in the ground before the end of August. So when I say spring planting, I should probably say late winter, early spring. So you go past August, what you've just said really applies.
Yeah.
You start having to think about having to water your plants over the summer. Yeah. So definitely, as soon as you have bigger plantings and you know you're going to be busy doing other stuff and you haven't got time and resources to water seedlings over summer, make sure they're in by the end of August. By the way, everything I talk about here is aimed at planting trees without ever having to water them. Yeah. So no having to go back and water them. That's the reason for me harping on so much about cultivation and particularly weed control, is have no competition there so the seedling can grow without the grass taking all that moisture that Mother Nature provides for it. One other point about planting, if you've got sites where you've got a big species mix for biodiversity, and the species mix was designed, I probably didn't talk enough about species selection, but I'll come back to that. If the species selection was designed to fit, say, a riparian planting, a planting along a river or a water course, where you've got a variety of, or large variation in moisture availability, where you might have areas that are really flat, low-lying that get flooded in after every rain, where it's really almost boggy most of the year, or even for a large part of the year. And as soon as you go up on the dry banks, it's totally different. Make sure you have somebody in your team that can put the right plants in the right place. Seen things fail where there's been a good plant mix designed for a planting site, and then the volunteers came in and did a really good job planting everything, but didn't spend much time actually thinking about which plants go where. So, and the same would go for a windbreak. If you're planting a windbreak, is just make sure you have somebody in your team that knows which plants go in the front row and which plants go, or even if the windbreak goes through high and low spots, you adapt your species mix to put the right species in the lower lying moister areas, and the more drought tolerant and dry loving plants up on the high ridges. Make sure you get that right. That'd be really bad to miss out when you're putting them in the ground. Maintenance. That's probably the one that's the hardest to do in some ways, because everybody, after they're planted, you get busy doing other things. Try and, in your planning, put a component, a serious component in, at least for regularly going through and inspecting them. Often you can keep maintenance to a minimum by just picking up something early, like a bad insect outbreak that you might have to deal with, that's quite easily to deal with before they defoliate all your plants. One in particular I show in that blow-up photo, where tree guards can be a real curse for plants not wanting to grow out of them. There's this nice little warm protective cover there, and they grow really soft, eucalypts especially, and they just bend over. Have you experienced that? I've seen quite a bit of that. I've seen trees where it's flopped over and then turned all the way around and grown out, so you've got this curl in the tree. Looks quite funny, but if you have too many of them, they're not going to be good windbreak. So all you have to do is put your hand in and help them out of the guard, so they hang out over the top and then they strengthen up. If there's any bad insect outbreaks, you can deal with them early. And if there's heavy weed regrowth, so in other words, if your weed control in the beginning wasn't good enough after all of that, then you can carefully, either by mulching or by using herbicide around the tree afterwards, very carefully, without any drift or anything getting on your trees, you can knock it back once more. And while we're at that's where these newer, what do I call them, organically approved herbicides come into play. There's a product on the market now called Slasher, and there are a few others, which are plant oils that are useful for well, they're first of all approved by organic farming, for organic farming operations, and they're partially sold as an alternative to glyphosate, which is probably a bit misleading because they don't really work like glyphosate. The plant doesn't absorb the chemicals and kill the plant properly. It just really burns the foliage off. The drawback is that they're not as effective. The grass will just come back, but they can be really useful for something like after planting weed control, where you just want to knock the grass down.
How close can you spray the grass-specific herbicides?
That's another option, a selective herbicide that will just knock the grasses off, yes. In a forestry situation, that's what's done. The herbicide used for after planting is fine-tuned and is possible to do. There are broadleaf selective herbicides and grass selective herbicides. They would work well. The drawback is that they're expensive, and they are also more toxic than glyphosate or anything like that, so toxic to humans. So you have to be, well, you should be trained or be competent in using these things.